Welcome to this panel session for Risk Awareness Week, talking about how we can build the case for proactive safety risk management. I'm Christian Harris. I'm the founder of Slip Safety Services and the host of the Safety and Risk Success podcast. And I'm delighted to have a great panel with me today to discuss these topics. Gemma Arnold, who is Head of Health and Safety for Virgin Active UK, Crystal Danbury, Director of Insurance and Safety at Sainsbury's, and Diane Chadwick-Jones, formerly Head of Human Performance. I think that's the right way of calling it, Diane, is it? It's at BP, yeah. with a background in operations and safety. So a great panel and a really important topic, which we're looking forward to deep diving into today. Do join in the comments. Do give us your feedback, pose any questions to us, and we will try to answer them. We may get a bit wrapped up in our conversation, but we'll certainly come back to them and answer them after the event, worst case scenario. So let's get started then. The first question I've got for you guys is, what's your perception on the importance of safety from a typical board's perspective? Diane, do you want to start with that? Yeah. You've worked in a big business.
Okay, absolutely. Well, so in the boards that I've been working with over the past few years, it sits at the top. It's actually the overarching consideration of what is going on in the business, because I work in high hazard industry businesses. Yeah. So whether it's the energy, whether it's transportation, whether it's pharmaceuticals, these businesses, if anything goes wrong with safety, for example, in pharmaceuticals, then we're talking about thousands and millions of people who are affected. So safety is lived as a value, and the decisions are made through the lens of safety, because that is the license to operate in these kind of companies.
Okay. Gemma, you're obviously working in a very different sector to Diane. What's your experience or view of how important safety is seen to boards in the sectors that you've worked in?
Yes, very different industries altogether, but I agree completely with what Diane said. It's really part of the culture of our business and a value that sits right at the top, from our CEO all the way through to our frontline team. The board are always interested in things that we can do to make our team safer, our members safer when using our club. So yeah, actually, really positive reactions to any initiatives and campaigns that we launch, which is great for me. But it's really important, as Diane said, that is part of the culture and the value that is right at the top of the business.
And you guys, obviously, in your sector, had a lot of acute focus around the whole COVID experience. How have you found that has changed attitudes or sort of decision making, or has it just kind of been an amplification of what was there already, would you say?
I'd say definitely an amplification of what was there already, but it's allowed a lot more of the sort of middle management within our organisation to include us right from the get-go, where it's at the forefront of their minds now that we need to look at the risks associated with new activities, or even just making minor adjustments to some of the stuff that we already do. So it's really just allowed us to be more involved in the rest of the business, I'd say, and to amplify the culture that we were already working with, strong foundations.
Yeah, good stuff. Crystal, you've worked in obviously different sectors, perhaps more so than the other two. So I'd be interested to get your view on any differences, I suppose, between some of the sectors that you've worked in and then kind of maybe where you're working now in high profile retail, where I'm sure safety is obviously very important.
Yeah, it absolutely is. I think it's been really interesting, actually, sort of traveling from, I would say, sort of hyper safety critical nuclear industry, where safety was seen as the day job. Our job is to be able to operate and not impact others. And actually, the most mature safety culture, as you would expect, it was very, very day to day to say we're about to do A, B, and C task. And even if it was a BAU task, we were talking about the risks and the mitigations to it. So from top to bottom, investment was never a problem. Mature conversation was everywhere. And safety was really the heart. I think going through some of the other industries, really interesting. Telecoms particularly was very interesting, where We had a great CEO who was started as an apprentice engineer, so really fantastic. He really understood what it felt like to be at the sharp end of risk, and his empathy was really high. His safety conversation was very present. But then you had these real sort of hardened operational directors who were just like, just get the job done, put the pressure on, mandatory overtime. And the balance, I think, between the empathetic CEO and the drive of the directors to at all costs get it done was absolutely vital. So safety conversations, I would say, in the telecoms industry were a bit, what are you doing about it? And a big drive for me was, how do we get to what are we doing about it? How do we change so we all feel accountable and engaged? So that was a wonderful journey to be on. But I would say for many organisations, we're going through that evolution of safety, what are you doing? And COVID, as you've mentioned, I think brought very much the conversation to the fore, where what are we doing? How do we protect our people? And that final point, Sainsbury's group. So we have Sainsbury's, Argos, Habitat, Home Bargains. I've never really seen a board quite as engaged. One of our values is be human. Well, actually, our 3 values are be human, make it better, and own it. And it really, really does resonate right through that safety conversation. How are you owning your own risk? How are you making it better? How are you mitigating? And how are we looking after people? And it's really, I've never felt the safety conversation be so present and the care be so overt. So it's a real pleasure, the way that this board operates.
That's great.
I've got a kind of a comment kind of sparked by what Crystal said, in that in some companies I see the leaders deeply caring about safety, but they don't quite understand how safety is created.
Yeah.
What they think it is about just follow the rules or you'll be punished, or just get the job done. But do it safely, but get the job done.
Yeah.
And so there's this enormous tension, as Crystal said, about the senior leaders who deeply care, but don't quite understand the reality that the workforce are facing. They don't quite understand the reality of how incidents happen, that it's many different things that come together to make an incident to happen, rather than a poor choice by the last person to touch the piece of equipment. Of course, it's not. Of course, we don't have bad apples. We have great people who've been working with us for years, and they're just trying to do the best they can under the circumstances where the work is difficult. And so that piece of education is very important for leaders, rather than saying who's accountable, who are we going to discipline, follow the rules or you'll be punished, to instead say we've got great people, they must have been in a difficult situation. How do we find out about what's going on here so that we can prevent it from happening again?
Yeah, amen to all of that.
Yeah, it's often, in my experience, the case that boards typically are bought into certainly the theory of safety being important. But often what happens is that you kind of we always talk about silos in businesses and we think of that being sort of horizontal silos, but I kind of see that we have these kind of vertical silos when it comes to safety, whereby you kind of end up with, the people on the shop floor wanting to be safe because they're the ones doing stuff. But then sometimes there's this kind of layer in between the board who aspire to be good and the shop floor who wants to be good because it's protecting themselves. And then it's things like, as you said, operations, cost control, got to look after the P&L, and then that's where these kind of blockages, in my experience, kind of can sometimes happen. And you said, Gemma, that you found that the COVID has helped to sort of alleviate some of that in your business.
Yeah, I think it's echoing what Diane and Crystal have both said. I think it just really allowed us to work as a one team goal and one team ethos, where it was a we conversation, not a you, and there was loads of consultation and feedback going both ways, right from the front line right up to the MD and the board. So I think that was actually really refreshing, and actually something we've taken forwards into the new work that we're doing, because it is, we all know how important those conversations are, but in that, with that specific risk, no one was expecting it, and we all had to change and be agile. So it was really important that we had that two-way conversation, and there was lots of listening taking place, as well as communicating to the rest of the business. So I think, yeah, as I said, building on really strong foundations that we already had, and just slightly different focus, slightly different lens, allowed us to be more agile and work as one team.
Mm-hmm. I've been saying for the last sort of 2 years, since the whole pandemic situation, that in many ways there's never been a better time in history to be involved in this world that we are of safety and risk management, because I think you've got the biggest stage that you've ever had. You've got the most influence that we've ever had, so therefore we've got the most opportunity to get some good stuff done. Be interested to get any views on that, and also kind of where we might see that ability or that positioning kind of moving over the years. Do we feel as if we've now got stronger foundations that will sustain, or is there a risk, for want of a better term, that might be a short-lived fortunate position that we're in?
Well, so there's an interesting situation where we've got some groups thinking that they're dissatisfied with the safety plateau and what's happening, and other groups of companies who actually think, well, we're doing fine with safety. And even though COVID gave a huge wake-up call. So I think the jury's out, actually. I went to a conference last week and I saw that huge division. There are 250 people. There are many of VP HSEs, VP of safety of enormous companies, of global companies. And there was, quite a division. And so I think we're still in a transition of some companies thinking that we have to make some pretty big changes in terms of how we see safety, and other companies feeling, well, we're actually fine and let's just carry on. I find it a little puzzling, because what that means is that they get repeat incidents and they get bad things happening, which are surprises. Yeah. But that, I think, is where we're at. But I mean, Crystal, I know you see this quite a lot. What is your thought?
I think in terms of, if the question was, have we awoken the sort of safety conscience in most people, particularly leaders, through COVID? I think yes. They haven't had a choice but to have to wake up to this. I do think it's really interesting that division is very clear from where I'm sitting too. I do feel that right now there is an opportunity to really tune in to that consciousness, and it's going to be down to safety teams, I think, to really become the magnet, stick to them, keep the conversation alive, and keep their conscience or consciousness to risk awake. I think if we slid back into the background, you'll see organizations already are, when there is a feeling of, oh, it's over, people slip back into their old mindsets so easily. The day job becomes the day job. If, let's say, you're money focused, for example, you are in finance, and we've been having these risk conversations, the risk to our organization, the risk to our customer base, etc. We will invest in controls. COVID is now over. If you don't keep that awareness awake in the mind of that professional, it goes back to just P&L. No, you can't do that. No, there isn't a wider conversation. So I think I can see it's going to be down to the organization and probably the safety and risk professionals in that organization to lift themselves and say, I want to stay here in your conscious and want to keep the conversation alive. Otherwise, I think we'll just go back to BAU. What are safety doing about it, unless you're a really progressive business?
Are there any other kind of things on the horizon?
My big thing for my team at the moment is every single safety team that exists definitely has probably areas, pockets, swathes of complex process that's not particularly required to manage risk very well. So it would be, how do we make safety simpler for the organization? And then in that, how do we have mature conversations and really building the ROI conversation? This is actually what your current standard costs you. If we do this investment, your ROI is this. So I think for us, it's broadening that skill base to not just say, but the moral compass says, that's me. I live on the moral boat. But I have to remember to drop the sail with different things on, so people understand my direction. And one of those big things, especially as investment will become more difficult if the cost of living crisis gets much worse, It's making sure that I'm talking in their language. Like, what is the ROI? How does this help the greater good and you?
Yeah, that's interesting, and I think it's something, going back to the points we were just making about that sort of division in thoughts as between, we've got to continually improve versus actually we're doing pretty well. It's really important to meet people where they're at, isn't it, and understand and empathise with where they are, because if you sort of if you're talking in a different language to them, in simple terms, they're never going to understand you or want to be working with you and be influenced by you. And so I think that's really important.
Well, that's our role as safety people, is to be the interpreters and the influencers.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. What in terms of activities that you guys have completed then, and around investments, improvements, changes to try to drive a more proactive and better outcomes in terms of safety risk management, what would be some of the main sort of benefits, key business outcomes, KPIs that you've seen? Gemma, have you got any examples of kind of where you've done a project and changed something, invested in something, and kind of some of the key outcomes that the business saw as a result?
Yeah, definitely. We've been on a bit of a project mission with a lot of things like this actually, throughout COVID and starting prior to that. So really starting to reap the rewards and see the benefits of the work that's gone into that. But I think a highlight for me is the introduction of an e-compliance system within our business. So really, almost, definitely tearing up the paper and sticking to more technology and IT based systems to manage risk within our gyms. So being able to walk around the site with a tablet and complete a checklist rather than using paper, and that notifies my team in the centre, adding photos, PDFs, witness statements, whatever might need to be there. That's been really important for us in terms of having that data-driven approach to, if we're putting together a business case for investment, we can say that we've analysed the data around checks, we've analysed the data around team member feedback, accidents, near misses, and we can really build and strengthen that to support the return of investment, as Crystal just said. Really gives us that really strong platform of evidence to bring to the table. So I think, being more data driven is something we're always striving for in a lot of areas of our business. But for me, it's really transformed how we can manage and lead safety within Virgin Active. It also makes the team members' lives a lot more easy on a day-to-day basis, and a lot less storage and filing. So multiple win-wins there, but that would definitely be a highlight for me.
So you've identified there, obviously there's the human safety improvement factors, which are good. There's operational efficiencies, and then cost benefits to the investment and an ROI, if I've understood correctly.
Yeah, definitely. I think all of those things, and probably more that we just don't have time to list today. But it's been a great project for us.
Yeah, I think obviously it's getting that ROI is really important, isn't it? Diane, I've heard you talk about some good examples of this over the years in terms of projects that you've done. I don't know if you want to choose one that with some good outcomes for the organisation.
Yeah, well, I'll take one that actually won a ROSPA award, which is just there behind me, and which led to a reduction from 40,000 people, with 1,000 of them being injured per year, to the same 40,000 people with 200 people being injured a year. Now, 200 is too many, right? But you can see it's quite a big shift in terms of the number of injuries. And what actually happened, and this is in BP, and it started in 2014, where there was quite a shift in the safety culture from quite a focus on compliance to instead to proactive safety, to looking at the difference between work as we think it's being carried out and work as it's actually being carried out. So actually walking down the jobs, obviously the safety critical jobs, we're not talking about kind of solving world hunger here and doing every single risk assessment that way, but the ones that would really injure somebody or really cause some sort of negative impact, and looking at the work as imagined versus work as done, and actually looking what made the work difficult and redesigning the work. And so that carried on for a number of years, and obviously still is happening and of course with other work as well. It's not just the one thing, it's the whole safety strategy. But that brought us that more proactive safety view on, well, if people are not following the rules, why are they not following the rules?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. And that brought us to a place, us being BP, to a place of a reduction, helping us reduce our level of incidents, which of course then has a massive impact on the ROI, on the efficiency and profitability of the business.
Yeah. I've got a hypothesis which I talk about a lot, which I call the 4 Ps. So I talk about proactive safety and risk management, producing these 4 Ps, which is protection. So in other words, people feeling safe and looked after and cared for. And that if you have people in that state, your workforce and your clients, I suppose, as well to some extent in that state, that drives performance. Performance drives profit, and profit gives you power to do exciting things, whether that's grow and expand or R&D or charitable stuff or whatever it is. And to me, the bit that the opportunity is kind of what you've just discussed, Diane, which is linking protection to performance. Because I think every board, every CEO would say, yeah, we want a high performance team, and we can buy into, a high performance team is going to give us better results. So our job is to try to get as much evidence as we can that being safe, feeling protected, etc., is going to drive that performance. And it's kind of finding the data, finding the evidence, whether that's quantitative or qualitative, that supports that point, I suppose, is really the interesting opportunity.
Well, I do have a good data set on that as well. So BP did a study, which is published, and I can provide it to people. It's published in Safety Science, across many different sites, and found that the places where with a higher level of trust, and my manager listens to me, and I feel cared for, and I can speak up without fear of reprisal, those sites not only did they have a lower number of incidents, but they also had a higher level of efficiency and productivity.
Yeah.
So that was, and that was quite a strong message then, and why is the question. It's not as simple as a loss conversation of if there's an incident, then we've got downtime. It's not as simple as that, because those sites, of course, were having an increase in efficiency. What it was is the same attention to detail that we have on safety and proactive safety also finds those weaknesses and issues to do with efficiency as well. And so that is why those sites were more effective. And that was a very, very strong message with a large data set, peer reviewed and published in Safety Science.
Very good. Yeah. So recommend everyone checks that one out.
Yeah.
What's your experience, Crystal, of this this sort of quandary or this opportunity? How have you been able to bridge that gap between sort of safety and protection and performance?
I think it's something I'm very passionate about, and I think I once saw it on a slide at a Health and Safety Expo. I think it was Helen Rawlinson or Rolson, and she just had like a bell curve and a tiny little spot on one side, and it was bright red, and it pointed down and said accidents happen, and it was like all other work. And she was like, isn't it bizarre that you would wait, or when somebody has an accident, typically they did what they did that day every day before, and so did all of their friends, and so did all of their colleagues. If you actually spend time frontline and see that practice daily, you never had to get to the investigation, you never had to get to the safety team interaction, you never had to get to the lost time, you never had to go to the harm. You can see that and proactively engage. And it's something that I'm passionate about anyway. And in Openreach, I used to spend a day every other week with engineers, as many different types as I could, as many different parts of the country. And I became aware of a feeling that it became almost a joke that some of the green cabs that you see were in really dangerous locations. Middle of roundabouts, on A roads, so people would have to sort of put trainers on and sprint across several lanes of traffic, on the very edge of 60-mile-an-hour roads, on T-junctions, all these places. And it would be this one's in and out, mate, because, you know, this cab's been mowed down 3 times and I don't want to be sat here. And I was like, oh, okay, all of the heckles, all of the concern. So I went back to my team and I said, I want you to do a big piece of work for me. So some of this is reactive, right? This is stuff that we know before, but there are also like 8 million cabs or something like that. Lots of them haven't been mowed down, but I would like to know the commonalities between the ones that fall over, get smashed. And we came up with sort of 4 really crucial things: blind spots, 60-mile-an-hour roads, etc. And then we dug into planning practice. What actually happens? How do we assess the protection of the individual that will work at that kit in future? And it wasn't part of the process. So not only was it very easy to build a business case, because it's very expensive to rebuild those cabs. Cheapest is sort of 80 grand a pop, most expensive, you could think 180 grand a pop. Isn't it easier if we just invest to move them proactively if they are in these areas that have these 4 touch points? So let's move those proactively. At the top of that pyramid, though, everything that has high frequency visits and has been mowed, we just move now. And the board, because we had pulled that information, that reactive information together very well, we're like, let's get on it. Let's get that top of that pyramid sorted. We'll do the bigger splay after. And the proactive piece comes to, well, the design process is wrong. And we already know the hierarchy of control is very clear. If you can eliminate the risk, you should. But I think that's sort of, it's such a good model, but we just forget it because it seems like 101 of safety. So we completely redesigned the planning of future cabs and poles so that the system just would not and would block any cab or any piece of equipment being put in an area that was high risk. So, you know, likelihood of them being hit, mowed down, customers going out, compensation, all of that, in the future, the risk plummets because we know what our risk factors are and we're mitigating them at design stage. But proactively designing out that risk not only helps the customer, but absolutely helps the engineer. And I have to say, that's one way of engineering out risk. It's one way to react. But the buy-in from the engineer, that you now care about me, your proactive nature and you coming out has resulted in something changing. You're listening. I feel protected. It was a real culture shift.
Yeah, and those people are going to just be so much happier in their jobs, and they're gonna you know, stay longer and not change jobs, and they're going to work a little bit harder, and they're going to just be more loyal. And it's all of these benefits are all there, aren't they? But it's just kind of, how do we go through that process of capturing that right information? Because I mean, I think the way that you approach that was very analytical and very data led, and I think sometimes that we can fall into the trap of maybe not going to that level of rigor, because if you're coming to the board with, you know, an investment of something, you know, they're going to be often led by the financial, aren't they? So we need to have some data and a really strong business case to put to them. Otherwise, they're going to be less likely to go for it, I suppose.
Yeah.
What do you think, Gemma? I'll come to you on this first. In terms of the difference between a mindset of being proactive in a positive sense, as in, you know, we want to do the right thing and we know this is the right thing to do, and therefore let's invest and do stuff about it, versus a sort of more negative sense, for, you know, as in, we might get some claims, we might get some adverse publicity, and how would you see the balance of that, you know, affecting decision making in businesses?
I think as we've sort of spoken to on previous points, we need to address the right people in the right way, speak their love languages. I think that's really important. There will be certain people in the business that X relates to and Y relates to someone else. So I think it's really important that whoever you're pitching to for this investment, it's really nailed all of those points. Definitely, of course, you want to be going in with the positive stuff first, but allowing each person who is listening to you and taking that information on board about the risk that's been presented and how we can fix it, a chance to hear it from their own perspective and give them the context they need to be able to make the decision. So as much as everyone is obviously invested in everything that we're doing, it's really important that everyone gets the information they need to be able to make the right decision. I always tend to, definitely include the claims and potential enforcements and stuff, but I tend to leave that to the end of presentations, as I think it, as you said, it's quite a negative way to open. And actually, what we all strive for in our profession is to make safety less scary, and as Crystal said, simplify, give people the tools to really understand. And if you're using loads of jargon and other things, that's going to be really hard for people who have non-risk based roles to understand throughout the business. And I think if it's always sort of been clear to me that if you present it in that way as part of your business case, actually sometimes that can affect the way you think about it as a safety and risk professional. And as you're designing training or policies and procedures around it, you suddenly fall into that trap of being that scaremongering person. I've definitely been guilty of it before, and you sort of catch yourself and give yourself a reality check and say, hey, this isn't what this is about. I think it's just being really open, really honest, definitely bringing those parts to the forefront, because they're sort of equally important. But improvement in safety is a positive thing for the business and for our teams and anyone that we work with across. And I think it's super important that we make that the forefront of our business case and the why. I'm definitely in the moral boat as well, Crystal. So we can paddle that one together. But I
think we probably all are on this.
Definitely. It's a strong boat, but it's a really good way to open, I think, and that's what I found in my experience.
Oh, Gemma, I'm loving this thing about making safety less scary. It's because if we lead with fear, okay, what we're doing is we're really undermining the conversation about being proactive. And it's a bit like, we've got people carrying suitcases and they're hurting their backs, and so we try and tell people off for not carrying the suitcases properly, or put them into more training, or make them have less heavy suitcases, when instead we should be taking a step back and saying, well, actually, what really is the problem here? We should be having wheels on those suitcases, shouldn't we? And so what Gemma's talking about is that transformation of, instead of leading with this kind of compliance policeman kind of foot, instead we're talking about what could actually be, how we could transform into thinking of safety from a much more positive perspective. So I'm loving that, Gemma.
It's going to be my new hashtag, I think. I've just made a note for my next training piece. So
very, very good. But Diane, you've obviously had experience with the jobs and sectors that you've worked in of some of these really catastrophic things happening as well. And so, would you say that those occurrences have shaped thinking? I'm sure they must do. Perhaps that's a silly question, but to what extent have they shaped thinking, or is it not so helpful to focus on those, even though some of those things have happened, high-profile cases that have had a big effect on lots of people's lives?
Well, I'd say that in those industries, it really does help make more of the business case for safety. And that the people who run those kind of companies, as Crystal said, that they actually have operations experience in those companies. And that is, I think it was the telecoms that you were talking about, Crystal. And I think that makes a huge difference. If I would say, what have the big changes happened from these large events in whatever sector it has been to improve the understanding of how safety is the way that we make our decisions, but secondly, that our leaders need to understand our businesses, because otherwise it's very difficult for them to really connect to the risk. And yes, we can connect leaders to the risk by walking them around whatever operations we are. And I'm sure that in both Gemma's and Crystal's companies, that the leaders are out there seeing the reality of what's going on. And then for us to show them, run them through how something has happened and how we can kind of deeply understand what caused that. So I'd say that those were the kind of the two changes that have happened from large events occurring in an industry.
Yeah, which makes sense, and I think it is really important, isn't it, for the leaders to be out there and seeing what's going on. What do we think then in terms of the audience that's with us today, and do give us your comments on this video as you're watching. Some of them are going to be safety professionals, some of them are going to be business leaders, decision makers. What kind of advice would you give somebody who's a non-safety person around their mindset and perhaps how to think about things a little bit differently than they may have done before on the importance of this proactive safety risk management? What kind of advice would you give to those sorts of people, Crystal, do you think?
I think the first thing that I would say, particularly to the non-safety people that are decision makers and leaders in organisations, is proactive often sounds like a luxury. Like reacting to something is a moral imperative. We have all this data. We can really see the cost underneath that. Getting proactive can sometimes feel luxurious. We don't have to respond to it. What I would say is, for the organisations that are being proactive, that are managing out that risk, they're also managing out underperformance and managing out downtime, reputational damage, brand damage, not to mention things like really unseen costs, repairs, maintenance, re-recruitment, sick pay, all of that stuff. It's not a luxury. It is a very, very astute way to do business, to say what is over the horizon. And we do it in business terms very well. What are the competitors doing? What is the market bringing? What's the stock market do? We try to project, even with budgets, we project. What are we going to need? What does it look like? Dealing with risk is exactly the same. We should be looking at what our appetite is for risk, what's coming over the hill, and what's going to be really damaging your business in unforeseen and, in almost silent ways. So really try and get out there, feel that risk, because one of the other things is it may feel luxurious to be thinking about people and saying, oh, we don't ever want somebody to get hurt. You can be tricked into thinking, but it's inevitable. We're a large business. That's fine. It still costs you. And whether that is morally, staff, equipment, whatever it is, it's a great way to do business, to get in front of all of that negative.
Mm-hmm. I do think as well, I'd be interested to get your view on this, that there's this kind of, one of the other reasons I talk about this being a great time to be involved in this world is that I think there has been this shift sort of generationally of people who are more inclined to be activists and standing for causes. And so things like the environment and health and safety, I think, is just kind of, it's the way that things are going, isn't it? The workforce in 10, 20 years is going to be full of people who are much more invested in those themes and to attract and retain staff and to get and to keep customers. You're going to have to move this way anyway, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I think the thing that was on my mind as you were saying that, well, actually, I think I've spoken enough. Why don't we turn it over to Gemma or Diane?
Yeah. Gemma, I think Gemma, because I'm sure that Gemma's got a very important point about this.
Yeah, I think Crystal said that really well. I'm not actually sure I've got that much to add to it, to be honest. But
that's why I had to change the subject a little bit, because I was thinking.
Oh, no, I do have something to say about proactive safety, but
good, yeah.
Actually, so building on what Crystal said, that it's not a luxury. Then the second question is, how do I start?
Yeah.
Okay. And the actual starting, because what you said, Christian, was as a mindset was in your question, right? The start of proactive safety sits within reactive safety. So don't get scared. Don't get worried about this. So when something happens, whether it's a change of plan or whether there's an incident or whether there's some sort of problem, we're looking to you as the VP of safety or the CEO or on the leadership of the company to have a little shift in how you respond to that bad news. It's a little shift. So instead of being really upset, and obviously really upset, hold it in and say, our people must have been in a difficult situation. How can I help you?
How can I help?
Rather than saying, oh, not again. Why can't we get good people? Okay. And I think we've all seen this. So go with this supportive approach. Why? Because as soon as you move into understanding that the reason why this happened was due to many, many different things rather than the people on the day, that you will then be able to unleash the ability to look at things proactively. And why is that? Because when you move away from blame, you are able then for people to speak up about the things that they're worrying about, the things that they're, the workarounds, for example, as Crystal was talking about the carts, or I've forgotten the name, the word you actually used, of the things that were being crashed into.
Cabs, yeah.
The cabs. So that people knew that this was happening to the cabs, and if you put the cab in a particular place, it's going to get hit. And so, but actually taking a step back and saying, well, what is causing this? When you hear about all those near misses, that's when, instead of saying, oh, well, that person was careless, they weren't paying attention, instead you're going, right, what we need to do is we need to move this, make sure that that location is not allowed to be used anymore. And so that's how responding to bad news matters, and it unlocks the ability for proactive safety because people are less scared about telling you about the reality of what they're struggling in with and all the workarounds that they're doing.
You made a point in there, Diane, I just want to absolutely grab onto that, people not being scared to focus on reactive as well, because I think there's lots of talk about safety 1, 2, proactive, reactive, differently, all the stuff. The reality is there is nuggets of greatness in all the approaches, and they all give us the gift of knowledge and understanding. And from the cab example, it started reactive, but we were able to bring proactive design out of risk from that understanding. And that nothing even happened in front of me or the team. It was sensing somebody's feeling, digging underneath that and saying, what would you change? What would you change to make this better? And, really unleashing the possibilities, that open conversation, as Diane said. The minute you create a safe space and you ask open questions like, how can I help? I love one that was, if there was no cost implication, what would you change tomorrow? If you could just come to work tomorrow and it was different, what would it be? And it's amazing. Sometimes it's just, I changed these snips, my wrists kill, we downgraded the quality of them, and I can't cut through anything now. So now I actually have to break the rule and bring these because they don't work. Amazing, right? Fabulous. Nothing bad's happened yet. We've got some aching, but before that gets worse, you might be responding to something, might be a reactive, but you can do so much greatness as a result of that. And you can be proactive with that knowledge under your belt. So I love that. Don't be scared of the reactive. It absolutely leads to greatness too.
And you have to some extent, be reactive to what the data is telling you, because there's no point, for Gemma, for example, there's no point us talking about falls from height, let's say, which is obviously a big problem in your gyms, if the risk of, if nobody's going at height to be able to fall, actually you need to be reactive to what's actually going on in your specific circumstances, and coming at it from a data analytics perspective, and then an empathetic perspective of what are the issues that people are feeling about that perhaps the data doesn't share. Otherwise, you can't ever build that business case, I suppose. So you're sort of on a sticky wicket if you don't have that reactive side, and that's kind of why I, as Diane correctly alluded to, I use the word mindset, because I think it's about a mindset shift, isn't it? To just have that. I suppose the attitude that I like to say is, it's not telling people off that we're doing it badly. It's actually, we're good, but can we go from good to great? Can we continually improve?
I think
is that kind of how you'd approach it?
I think the biggest shift in engagement that I ever saw is I read the book The Infinite Game, and they talk about one-by-one policing in the game, in the book. And I made a video and posted it when I was at Openreach to say, let's do one-by-one safety. It doesn't have to be a really big thing. It doesn't have to be every day. But if you just do one thing that is different, there is going to be 39,000 different things that happened. So let's just do one-by-one safety. And I started this like hashtag one-by-one safety. It really started to ripple on, didn't feel big, didn't feel too mammoth for someone to get hold of and do something proactive. And then on National Safety Day, I put a video out that said, I know that you are already great. I know you take care of yourselves and your colleagues. Share something with us that tells us how you already do great safety. And I think within the day, we had 5,000 posts, many of them being compilations of many posts from the same team, where people were really proud to say, this is what I do differently. This is what I have done in my patch. This is how I'm changing my environment. And I still remember the comms team before it happened were like, no one's going to care. And the comms team after, giddy on the phone, like, I can't believe there's been so much traction. Let's stop looking at people like they're failing. And Diana said this at the very beginning. These aren't a bunch of bad people that come to make everybody's life in their own difficult. They come and they deal with the equipment, the circumstances, and the job that we gave them. And actually, sometimes we need to really celebrate what they get right, as opposed to only concentrate on what they get wrong or what has gone wrong.
Yeah. And that sort of culture is something that I would recognise in Virgin Active. Gemma, I think you'd agree with that, isn't it? About being positive and celebrating successes and working together.
Yeah, definitely. Reward and recognition is a huge part of us as a business, actually. But I try and make it at the forefront of a lot of stuff I do with my direct report to my team, all the way through to some rewarding good safety behaviours that I've seen on a site visit, for example, and pulling that person to the side and saying, hey, that was really great. It was really good to see you interact with a member in that way and ask those questions that needed to be asked, or whatever the situation might be. It's really important for us. And I think all of the things that both Diane and Crystal have said have really hit home with me. It's actually really nice and refreshing for us to sit together and talk about this as a group, because it not only brings it all to the forefront of our minds again in a new and refreshing way, but I think it's really important that we can spread the word and get some of the junior professionals and people aspiring to come into health and safety and business leaders, as we said, really on board with a pretty candid conversation about how we can just not be good but be great. Christian, to steal your comment there.
It's definitely something I'm really passionate about. I've been speaking to some people at IOSH, for example, about this, and is there something we can do to try to get this going as a bit more of a structured thing? Because I think that it would have a really big impact. And I guess if we could have had another 30 people on this panel, and we'd probably all be saying the same thing, but perhaps that's a bit of bias from me as to who I would invite to join me. So it's kind
echo
of
chambers.
Exactly. And we can't be stuck in an echo chamber. We need to be getting these thoughts out more widely, don't we?
Well, it's a big ask, isn't it? Because traditionally, safety professionals have been doing rules and regulations, and now we're asking, Gemma, Crystal, and I, and you are asking people to be influencing leaders. Okay, and influencing leaders around the proactive safety and a different view of how incidents happen. And so that's really, really tough, because you're a single voice in an organization where things have been the same for 30 or 40 years. And so how to get around that is actually to build a coalition. Is to build a coalition and to influence the people around you, and to build this coalition so that the safety department is together with the HR department, the safety department is together with the operations department. And the only way actually to build that coalition is that we have to be about solving the problems that the operations department have, or solving the problems that the HR department have, whether it's repeat issues, whether it's people leaving, whatever it is. We're offering this approach, which is a tried and tested approach, as we can see, with data behind it, that actually helps solve the problems across the company, rather than just being safety and paperwork.
Yeah. From box ticking to game changing, or something like that. That's just off the top of my head.
Well, that's now the name of this panel, obviously.
It's about you guys must have come across this story or case study of Alcoa and Paul O'Neill, and putting safety as the true number one priority, and all of the benefits that flowed from that. But it's about positioning safety as an enabler and not a problem, so that you don't want to. I remember walking into a health club, not one of Gemma's, with Gemma's equivalent a few years ago, and you could see the ashen faces on the faces of people on the front desk, and that's exactly the wrong response that you want, because they were thinking, oh, what's happened, or are we getting a surprise audit or something? And that's the total opposite of what you want, isn't it? You want people to, when you walk in, they're thinking, oh great, this is going to be helpful to me today, this is going to move things forward, this is going to be a benefit for me.
Definitely, totally agree. I think the day that you're just like, okay, I've come here for a hot desk, and you've got all those people like, when you've got a minute, have you just got a minute? Because I just need to tell you about a thing. And I remember getting to that point when I worked in rail. I used to log on to the in the depots, because that's where the biggest risk was. And over time, the donuts, the tea, the open conversations, I'm going to tell you a little bit, I might tell you a bit more. And then one day I got a call, somebody walk in the office, and my nickname is Brommers, so it was always status quo that I would be called Brommers. It was like, Brommers, got a bit of a big thing we want to show you. We're a bit worried about it, but could you just come? Toe detectors on, out into the workshop, and it was a big deal. It was a really big deal, but it was an even bigger deal that they didn't have to tell me. I never would have known, and nor would anybody. But they had got to that point that they trusted that conversation. So the ashen face gone, Brommers, you're here, put the kettle on. We are all here so that the business succeeds, and we're all healthy and we all get home. We're all doing that. It's not our job, your job. We're all here to help each other succeed. Yeah.
And that's a great way to finish, actually, because we've built trust, we've showed empathy, we've built relationships, we've proven that we can add value and be helpful and not be a negative force. And then that's when we get the good outcomes, which I guess resulted in something being done that prevented something from happening, which is kind of what we were talking about today, and being proactive. So thank you very much. Yeah, so thank you very much for joining, guys. Really enjoyed it. Thanks everybody for watching along with us as well, and thanks for all the comments and interactions. Hope that you've found this session useful. Do connect with any of us on LinkedIn. We're all active on LinkedIn, so that's a good place to find us if you want to continue the conversation. And thanks again, guys. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Christian.
Thanks,
and love to meet you. Bye.